You could do. Oh.
Okay, well, thank you so much indeed, Laura, for being here today. I will obviously give you the floor shortly to fully introduce yourself, but I suppose I need to introduce myself as well. So, it's great that we're having this conversation. We shall tell the audience what the conversation is about shortly. But just to say, I am Shara Lewis-Campbell. I am the co-founder of Beauty and the Beast Publishing. And this is a very, very dear and long-serving friend of mine, Laura, or Lottie Woodman, as people know her as, but I've always known her as Laura. We've known each other, would say about 40 years, if not more,
Yeah,
it's been that long. Yeah, just over 40 years. And it's just an absolute pleasure and honor to really have you in this space, not just to have this most worthwhile discussion that we're going to be speaking about, which is really about females and their journey with autism and ADHD. And I know that you've recently told me about that, having that condition, and it's just all very new to me as well. I wish I'd known about it before, and I suppose this is another thing that's inspired me to have this conversation with you, this most worthwhile discussion, as well as the fact that it really works very well with our Gender Crap publication that just came out on the 30th of May, which we're really pleased to be the publishers for that. So there's been a range of different conversations, all are very, very important, but this one is both, I think, but most pioneering, as well as a very, very important discussion to have. So Laura, I'll stop talking for a moment and pass it over to you if you want to just introduce yourself to the audience.
Yeah, my name is Laura. I've had a very weird journey the past few years in discovering that I am neurodiverse, and the ups and downs that come with that realization, and how I've kind of come to terms with it and learnt to embrace it and learnt to not be bitter about my childhood and not knowing and not having support and everything. And I've had to learn to let go of any anger and bitterness, which there was a lot of, and how to just let go of that and just, I suppose, live in the here and now with who and what I am, and just work out what that means now and where I go from here, really.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for sort of explaining that. I think that, since you've mentioned it to me, I know that we were at an event most recently, like a few months ago, and we spoke about it there, and that's when you first mentioned it to me. And I'd already just seen a program, and it had Tanya Beardsley on it. She's like one of these celebrity sort of housewives from one of those programs, and she had been recently diagnosed with ADHD. And so it kind of sort of resonated with me and the things that we had been discussing when you had raised it. And she is now the patron for, I believe it's the ADHD Foundation. And most recently, there's been Christine McGuinness, who's another sort of like celebrity in part of that world, but I believe her husband is also like a comedian, and she suffers with autism. And she is now, after being diagnosed, she is now the patron for the National Autistic Society. So I just wanted to know, there's quite a lot of discussion now. They've sort of brought it to the forefront, as it were. But as you quite rightly said, I mean, I was horrified to know that you had to do some self-diagnosis to find that you were actually diagnosed with, these conditions. And I was just horrified. The ADHD, I can sort of like, now looking back, I can say, yeah, definitely.
That's
autism,
it's like, oh yeah.
Yeah, that kind of makes sense. Yeah.
Now it
that
makes
sense.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no
that kind of makes sense. Very much. Yeah, definitely not. But the autism really, really shocked me, kind of thing. And to think that for both conditions, that you probably did not feel supported even by your friends at the time, because, we didn't know. I mean, you weren't probably aware
I
either.
didn't know.
Yeah,
that's the
exactly.
thing, I didn't know.
And suffering with that condition. Like, can I ask you, how did you cope with that? what was that journey like for you?
Trying to condense it, which I've learned is an impossible ask of someone with ADHD. You may have to bring me back on point a few times. I always felt odd, different. I was very well aware from primary school that I never seemed to fit in with anyone or anywhere. I always felt like I was second guessing everything. There was a lot of masking going on. And by masking it's literally like you put on the face of and you try and act as neurotypical as possible, although I didn't know that's what it was. So whoever I was with, I would emulate how they spoke, I would emulate what they done. So it was a weird time, and it was quite difficult because at that time, obviously, as you know, we grew up in a very diverse thing, and I felt most comfortable. I mean, I don't know if it's anything to do with it, but around people that weren't like me, because I felt different. If I was in a group where I looked different, it all made sense, and I felt a lot more relaxed because I was different. It was obvious I was different, so I didn't feel I had to put up a pretense, if that makes sense. If I was at home with my family, I was constantly on edge because I had to act and be like everybody else because I looked like them. I mean, I know that's not how it was, but when I was like primary school and everything, that's in my mind, that's how it was. So I've got to be like this person or that person, and it was hard work. And so if I was in a group where I was visibly different, there was less pressure from myself to be like everybody else. I didn't have to feel the need to follow what everybody else was doing. I could be just who I was. There wasn't the pressure, which ended up giving me an amazing experience of life. At that time, I feel very, very privileged to have made some amazing friendships, and really learned and appreciated different peoples and different, like I had a more of a world view, which early 80s, late 70s wasn't really happening with my demographic. So I feel beyond privileged that I had that experience, and it's kind of been a saving grace for me. It's been something throughout my life. It's something solid I've always had that I can go back to or cling to or remember. I look back at various things, and I learned about disassociation not too long ago, and became very well aware that every part of my past, my childhood, my 20s, I have disassociated from. I can remember them and talk about them, but it's like I'm watching a program about someone else. I don't have the emotions that I had at the time. I'm still trying to work out if that's just a me thing or an autistic thing. It is a journey finding out what is you and what isn't. But I've gone off the seat. I kind of talk and go the wrong way.
It's all very relative, you know. And you know, one thing I would like to say is, even when you were speaking about, you know, feeling like you didn't fit in and so on, I know that in our journey, you know, school, etc., I really resonate with all of what you say, because we didn't really fit into that model either, you know, at that time, you know. So I kind of, again, it kind of spurns me a little bit to know that we didn't know that you had this condition, neither did you. And at the same time as well, I feel really awful that I wasn't there to kind of support you, because we were really, really good friends as well, you know. So to know that I couldn't be there.
I don't know if it's appropriate to say on this platform right now, but on and off from about the age 11 to about 15, on and off, I did self-harm. Quite a bit. And you say you didn't, whenever I used to hang out with you or just going to your mum's and we just sit and listen to music or just sit on the wall as we did back then or whatever, when I was around you, and there's a couple of other people, but definitely you, where I didn't feel that overwhelmed, where that was I need to go home and do this. I need to go home and do this. I need. So you say that, but just you being there, what was a help.
It's comforting.
But a lot of times, it how can I explain it? It almost felt at times, especially during school's absolute hell for me. Absolutely. I mean, you were there. You saw how I played up. I mean, majority of classes, the teacher would walk in, point at me and go, "You out. I'm not in the mood for you today." It wasn't good. But I constantly felt like I was drowning in something I wasn't. I felt, I mean, I was constantly, by the majority of adults in my life, what's wrong with you? Why are you lazy? You never finish anything you start. You need to buck up your ideas. You're going to end up
lack of understanding. Big time.
I don't remember, and a lot of the things, the vast majority, I'm not saying I was a good kid apart from that, but the vast majority of things were either ADHD or autistic traits or behaviors that I was being told. I genuinely felt broken, useless. I mean, when we got our GCSE results and we went up to the school, because this is before emails and internet, I remember I was with a couple of friends, and we went in there, and we was all of like 10 meters or in the next room to where the results were. I didn't bother go and get my results because I was that convinced that I'd failed everything, because I was no good, I was rubbish. I'd literally gone with my friends for them to pick up theirs. I had so little self-belief and self-worth that I didn't take those 10 steps to get my results. Which, when I think now, it's pretty sad, bizarre.
Really, really sad. And sad. You know, did you ever find out what the results were in the end? Or
no, but I did when I was 36, 37. I went back to college to do my English GCSE, and I got an A star.
Wonderful. So did I.
I was shocked. I did that. That was the only one I was kind of gutted I didn't know, because I English was about the only subject I stayed in class.
But you were good at it though, from what I remember. You know, you were really good at it. And you just
I look back now and I think I was really good, but at the time I was literally just like, oh, whatever.
And we didn't really get the encouragement either. You know, there's a lot going on, wasn't there? You know,
I mean, there was a lot of social economic. I mean, it was that big recession in the 80s, 3+ million unemployed.
And we didn't have the best head teacher either.
No.
You know. You know. We'll leave that there.
We'll leave that one there. But I mean, GCSEs, I think the year above us were the practice ones. And we were the first ones. And I don't know if you remember, but the teacher would come in like 3 months into the 2-year GCSE course and be like, we have to do something else now. They've changed it.
That's right.
So
we were the guinea pigs when we first started.
So, and kind of being like mentally, I was going to say with the voices, that gives a whole different, with the thoughts, not the voices, the thought, with the 101 thoughts running through my head, having all that up in the air, there was no way I could have focused on something that was changing that often. It just wasn't going to happen for me at all. I'm
really sorry to hear that. So moving on sort of through the process a little bit more, when you have become, by this time, you're sort of aware that something isn't quite right and you're starting to navigate the self-diagnosis process. What was that like for you?
Slightly surreal. I'd been battling with my youngest. My youngest is now diagnosed as autistic, probably ADHD, but we had such a fight to get that assessment that I don't know if I've got any more fight left in, and it was stressful for them, and they're happy with who they are. But I was fighting with the school for 2-3 years. I kept being told they had behavioural problems, that I need to discipline them and put my foot down, and other things. And I was just like,
Unbelievable.
yeah, no, my child's a person. I'm not training a dog, you know.
Yeah.
And I think they tried to catch me off guard and was just like, well, if you're not going to do this, that, and the other at home, then we're going to have to send them for an assessment. And I was like, great, when? So we had all that whole process that went on for about 2-3 years. No, 4 years before they got the diagnosis.
Wow.
It was during COVID, so everything was delayed.
Yeah.
But obviously I got all the forms and everything, filled them out. What I knew about ADHD was very much the stereotypical bouncing off the walls, can't sit still, don't stop talking, misbehaving, that stereotype. Which is based on a very small number of boys on tests they done in the 60s. With most girls and women, whereas with boys, it's very much all over the place. Girls, it's very much more internal. So you're much more prone to emotional breakdowns, overwhelming meltdowns, that kind of stuff, which stereotypically, I was going to say up until recently, but it does still happen. We get labeled as, oh, women being women, they're over emotional, and that stereotype. And you still have doctors that think like that. I've encountered that a couple of years ago with a doctor. So I was going through all the lists, criteria for ADHD in girls and autism, all the rest of it. And so this was in relation to my youngest. And I'm going through it and I'm like, this, like, I'm literally reading about myself. Like behaviors, ways of thinking, issues and problems from undiagnosed. I'm just like, I'm literally reading a book about my life. But at the time, obviously, I was fighting to get my kid assessed and my kid sorted. So I had to kind of just push it to one side. Because obviously your priority is your child. Foregone conclusions. You deal with the child first. So once we got all that sorted, I kind of clocked that I was ADHD. And I mentioned to a couple of people, like, you know, I might be ADHD. And one of the most common replies I got was, from about 4 different people, their response was, didn't you know? And I was like, wait, what? It's like, oh, I just assumed, like, you're so typically ADHD. I just thought you knew. I didn't know this was not a thing. I was like, oh, and I've got a couple of friends that have done psychology in various courses in that. And one friend was like, oh, we mention it. It's like, you have a moment. It's like, it's Lottie, all right. Yeah, they're just having an ADHD. And it's like, we didn't know that you didn't know, kind of thing. And I was like, oh, okay. So that was a bit weird. But when they finally got diagnosed with being autistic, when they got diagnosed with being autistic, oh, my brain's gone. Hang on, I've got to reset my brain. Sorry, give me a moment. Yes. Sorry. So the doctor that I was speaking to was going through everything from my child's early years and everything. And I remember him saying to me, he goes, there's a lot of signs and traits that were very obviously showing from a very early age. Is there a reason why you didn't push for an assessment earlier? And I blurt everything out without thinking. I've just gone, oh, they didn't seem unusual. They were just like me as a kid. And he looked at me and just went, uh-huh. And I just went, oh, okay. And he didn't look up. He goes, you might want to look into that. And I'm just like, uh-huh. So, but it's, so obviously, so I started looking into that more in terms of myself rather than just my child, because my child had the diagnosis then. So we were sorting all that out. But it was difficult because at the time they gave me all these organizations and groups to help support me in EMS. Sadly, I think every organization was pro ABA, which no, just absolutely not. It's if you ever want to know more, go on to groups that are run by and are mainly dominated by adult autistics, and they will tell you what ABA does. to an autistic person. There are adults that are literally suffering PTSD because of ABA. And I think you mentioned the National Autistic Society.
Yeah.
They are very pro ABA.
Are they? Oh,
yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So there, I think I will look into that a little bit more, actually.
Yeah. And into what ABA, because they kind of push it, because they were saying to me in regards to my child, ABA will help them with this and help them with that. But when you break it down, it's you're training the autistic traits out of them. You're training them to be neurotypical, which having spent most of my life masking without the training, it's exhausting. I mean, I got diagnosed with depression from a teenager, which it turns out a lot of undiagnosed autistic and ADHD women in particular will have been diagnosed with depression throughout most of their adult life, because the pressure of being neurodiverse, not knowing, so therefore you can't understand how your brain works, so you're constantly fighting against yourself, causes depression, funnily enough. So yeah, a lot of women get misdiagnosed. Well, not misdiagnosed, but I see it, it's like putting a plaster on a bullet wound. It might soak up a bit of the blood, but it's not going to stop anything really, kind of thing.
And even like the couple of times you've mentioned as well, you know, the part about the, you know, with regards to the, sorry, I'm kind of losing my thought, with having the conditions and the fact that so many females are sort of having to self-diagnose and figure out what that looks like. You know, if you've got the condition and then you've got to do the self-diagnosing, I suppose that can be extremely challenging, as well as the fact that I think that from what studies have shown, and even the author of the book, Gender Crap, Bogart, he actually had a question for you as well. And you've raised that conversation a couple of times during this discussion. And he was saying that he read a report to say that there's a possibility that there are more females suffering with the condition as opposed to men. And because you mentioned about the self-masking, because we're so inept at doing that. What's your thoughts around that?
100%. I changed GPs recently, and I spoke to my new doctor, because every channel you go down to get an official diagnosis, it's easy to get blood out of a stone. But the doctor I spoke to is helping me get that the official process sorted. But he said from everything we've discussed, he's just like, yeah, you're right, kind of thing. But he was talking about how there's articles about the they're called the lost generation of women, because in the 70s they didn't think that girls got ADHD at all.
That's right.
And in the 70s,
how would they know if they were only ever testing men? You know, who came up with that decision? You know, obviously a bunch of men, but I'm saying
patriarchy. Hello, here's the patriarchy. Nice to meet you. It's big. Again, I think it goes down with this in particular. I mean, there's a lot of intersectionality when it comes to things like this. So I don't want to seem like I'm ignoring or blocking other things out, but specifically with this, like I said, women have always been seen as over emotional and over dramatic, and typically with ADHD in particular, the majority, not all, but the majority of women, it's the ADHD is internal rather than external.
Right.
So for me, I would, and I still do, but I kind of learned to manage them without knowing what they are. Now I'm unlearning it and learning to deal with it in a more positive kind of way. So, but I'm in that process where I do have these outbursts, these emotional outbursts, and something could go wrong, and I'll just throw stuff, and it's like I'm having a temper tantrum, and I'm like, right, so that now I have to learn to recognize the feelings I had building up to it, and learning positive tools rather than hiding who I am tools. So I'm going through this whole process at the moment. But yeah, the doctor that I spoke to, he said the reason why the waits are so long is because so many women 35 and older, what's happening is either their children or their grandchildren are being diagnosed, and they're like, with my kids, like, but I was just like them. They can't be ADHD, they can't be autistic because they're just like me. And then the penny drops.
Right.
And it's like, oh, and it is, I mean, I can only talk about my own personal experience with this, but at first there was a lot of bitterness. I'm not going to be like, I handled it wonderful. No, I was very angry. I was emotionally and mentally stomping my feet kind of thing. I was just, it's not fair. Why me? Very much self-pity, lots of wallowing in my own feelings. But you can only do that for so long before you become pathetic and before it becomes intentional. And obviously having a kid that hadn't long been diagnosed, my own feelings really weren't the priority. So I think having to just kind of like swallow that down, I've been doing that most of my life, so it wasn't actually that difficult. So pushing that all to one side and being able to focus on my child indirectly helped me, because I had to stay calm and I had to do this, but at the same time there was no hiding or shame about behaviors or neurodivergency, because obviously I'm talking to my kid, it is what it is, and so we just look at things differently. I know how to support you better as a mum, and I'm just like, okay, so it's not a death sentence, it's not negative, it's this whole a lot of people use the word, and you have as well, and I know you don't mean it in any way, people talk about suffering from the condition, and I don't see it as that.
It's not suffering, is it? It's more accepting, I think.
No, it's literally a difference. I found talking to other adult autistics and people, particularly women with ADHD, the reason why we suffer with our neurodivergences is because we live in a world that not only doesn't accept us, but doesn't even acknowledge us. For example, if you see someone in a wheelchair, you need ramps. If we have blind people, so we have the crossroads that beep. And we have books in Braille. Deaf people, we have sign language. For neurodivergent people,
what is that?
we don't, there's no everyday common
self-diagnosis. Apart from that self-diagnosis, which takes so long to kind of achieve, and it's kind of very much an independent journey, isn't it? Until you can get some support. It seems like, but there isn't. And what do you think should be in place, for people with the condition?
Well, this is going to sound like I'm being really, really simple, but you'd be surprised how many boroughs this isn't an option. People should have access to being assessed as an adult. That I know of at least 3 boroughs in London that I know for a fact, where if you are an adult, there is absolutely no resource. There is no assessment if you're an adult. It does not exist.
Wow. Oh dear.
And there's probably more, but they're the ones I know for definite. I'm lucky I'm in Lambeth. If I lived 5 minutes down the road and I was in Southwark, there are no resources.
But I tell you what, there is a way around that, because my understanding is, and not many people know this either, that you can actually not become a resident of more than one borough, but you can have an account for more than one borough. I would say, I would urge and encourage people that if you don't find that service in your area, to locate a service where it is in that area and do register for an account there. And then I think you can receive some support in that way.
It's hard, because even for me in a borough where it is available, I'm looking at roughly a 2-year wait for the actual assessment. Like, you have the appointments in between the actual assessment. There is the right to choose process, which is a bit quicker, but
what does that involve?
I'm very much pro-union and anti-privatising the NHS, so I refuse point blank.
Oh, right. Okay. Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
I will not use it. And I'm, again, these are things where I have a lot of rigidity with certain things, and I will not be moved, sometimes to my own detriment. These are very much autistic traits. I know what I believe.
Yeah.
Not to say that I don't ever continue to learn and grow.
Yeah.
Because if someone presents me, well, actually, this is what's happening with this, I'll be like, okay, so this is my new standpoint, and I'm not moving.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't know how to phrase it properly without it just blah 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 out my mouth. It's once I let go of the anger, it was like a massive sigh of relief.
Right.
Things that before would really trigger me and cause me to have internal meltdowns, and then consequently burnouts, and then consequently times of depression. I was like, oh, I have OCD with food. I'm very particular with food. I cannot have certain food touching each other. If it touches each other and I eat it, I will die. I mean, saying it out loud, I know how ridiculous it sounds, but if you give me food with certain things touching, I will literally be scratching the skin off my arms, and I have to go right now, and I will literally run home and stay in my room for 2 days. But now I know I'm not a freak, I'm not fussy, I'm not trying to be awkward, all the labels I'd had put on me. I'm like, okay, so I can plan around it. So, for example, if I go, people say, oh, we're going out to eat. I always say, where are we going? If they're like, oh, let's just go out and see if we can find somewhere, then I know, you know what, I'll catch up with you after, because I know I won't be able to cope with that.
Right. Yeah.
Luckily, most of my friends are pretty cool and it's just like, well, you choose, as long as it's not Nando's. I always choose Nando's. So I'm lucky in that respect, but just the not knowing can really, really set me off, particularly with food.
I understand.
So,
and I kind of get it in a way, because like, I suppose with most people, if you're having a home cooked meal, if you're not so much the restaurant sort of thing, but I know that with like some people want, I don't know, like say maybe the meat on top of the rice, you know, or some might want it to the side, you know what I mean? Like, or whatever. So I get that, you know, I can really kind of relate to that. The
difference is, because my oldest is very particular with whether the meat's on top of the rice or next to the rice. But I say to her, if I put it on the rice when you put it next to the rice, you're going to be annoyed at me. But if someone does that for me, I won't be able to eat for 3 days.
Eat it, yeah.
So
it's a different level, isn't it? Yeah.
It's extreme. Yeah. It's an extreme thought process, but again, knowing,
and every day, I suppose, presents new challenges as well, especially for things that you're not maybe you've not done before. It's new things that you're considering, you know, so I can appreciate all the organization and pre-planning that might need to do, especially what we already have to do as women anyway, do you know what I mean? And then you add that on top. I'm not saying that it's a burden or anything like that, but it's just something else that you have to sort of factor in and learn to kind of cope with, isn't it?
I think I know what you mean, but burden sounds like quite a negative word, but it is in that realm. I don't, like you said,
I don't think it is a burden. Yeah, it's not a burden.
But it is an extra bag you got to carry.
Yeah.
You know, and there are, if I'm perfectly honest, there are times I just sit there and I'm just, oh, why my language? And I just sit there and I'm just like, what the, and I have with ADHD, it turns out I'm not lazy and useless. I have executive dysfunction, which means my house is always a mess. I'm always disorganized. But being autistic, I hate mess and I hate being disorganized. So I live in a constant battle with myself. Like, I mean, that is constantly ongoing. Like I'm talking to you now, and there was a pile of clothes there, and I have washing on the clothes horse here, and I'm going to take that off, and I'll probably put that on top of the other pile of clean clothes that I took off yesterday, and that will stay there till it gets so high I have to move.
Get round to it.
But I'll look at it and it's like, I can see the thing. I want to do the thing. I need to do the thing. I want to do the thing. I will write lists about how to do the thing. I could pick up, I've got 3 notebooks literally on the coffee table next to me of lists of how to do the thing. I can't do the thing. And you get people saying things like, oh, you just got to get up and do it. It's like there's an invisible wall. And I physically can't
It's not
do
like
it.
that for
And
everyone, you know, to just physically just get up and do things, you know. I mean, even for the best of us that know that things have just got to done, you just got to be in the right mindset and the energy. Do you know what I mean? To be able to, you know, sometimes, like, even for myself, I think, oh, I've got all these things to do for the day, but I've got to kind of prioritize and coax myself into it. And if I really am not in the mood to do it, it just can't get done that day. So I kind of see with you, you know, maybe I need to go and get,
But
you know,
imagine that.
diagnosed as well.
Yeah, imagine that, but that being every day with everything.
Yeah.
It's
Mind,
and
it's
then
mindful to go through, isn't it?
then you get a lot of self-loathing, because I'm a grown-ass woman. My house shouldn't be messy. That there shouldn't be a pile of washing up in the sink.
It's not intentional though, is
you
it?
know,
You know?
but you have a lot of that self-loathing, and that sense of, well, everyone else does it, why can't I? What's wrong with me? And this is what I've had for nearly all of my adult life. Why are my friends functioning normally and I can't? And I'm constantly learning about how the ADHD brain works, and I might get some of this wrong because I remember the points but not the details. But there's a certain part of your brain, I think it's the back part, which is the organizing side. So right, I need to do this and this, and I can do that in the morning, that in the afternoon. That's the back. And then you've got the front bit, which is the actual, I might have the wrong way around. You've got the other part of the brain that's the doing bit, that you get up and do it. And with ADHD brains, I call them train tracks, that take bits of information from one part of the brain to the other. They're not there.
Right.
Or there's a train strike and you've only got two lines running, kind of thing. So the things that make you get up and do it, they're not there. So that is a constant battle. And again, talking about gender and how it affects gender differently. If you're a woman, even in 2023, the expectancy of keeping a clean house, cooking, looking after the kids, if you can't do those, you're seen as a bad woman, or a lesser woman, or
women
wrong
themselves
woman,
can feel quite
woman, or
like failures, you know, if they can't keep, you know, up with everything.
Whereas guys experiencing the same situation as me, struggling with the same things I do, having the messy house and the pile of washing up, they will not get the same criticism,
exactly,
the same judgment and the same pressure.
Exactly.
Which true. That very does true. Make me angry about, and I'm going to hold on to that anger because I'm supposed to be angry about that. But yes, so the gender imbalance with everyday things like that is huge. It's huge.
It is. It's something that needs to change as well. And I feel like as we get more females, you know, tested, you know, and this becomes more routine, then I think that will help to change the mindset, you know, of others, you know, and we'll bring about the change that we need, you know, so that women are recognized for having those conditions and that they're accepted better, you know, and we're not using these negative terms that I have, you know, or that we commonly use, you know, to describe, you know, because we don't have the understanding and the awareness and the education that we need to be able to address it, you know.
I think a lot of it starts with the medical profession, because so with my child, the first assessment we had, I was told, oh no, they have anxiety, there's nothing else wrong with them. My child was completely dismissed. My child is definitely autistic. One of the reasons why I changed GPs, but with my old GP, I spoke to one of the doctors there. This is a few years ago now, when I realized, hang on, I'm literally fitting the criteria for ADHD for women here. And I spoke to the doctor there, and he was like, how old are you? So I told him, and he was like, oh, he's probably, didn't even look at me. Oh, he's probably just menopause. And I'm like, well, how is it menopause if I've had this all my life? And he's patting me up, don't worry, dear, you'll be fine.
Absolutely unacceptable. Yeah, you're right. It will need to change with them, actually. It will need, and I think that's where it needs to start, you know?
Yeah, because the assessment that they initially done on my child, where the doctor said that they weren't autistic, when I looked into it more, this is when I found out about how it presents differently in females to males, how there's a difference in how it presents. And so I emailed him, and he rang me, and he said, well, I've never seen any of these. Like, these are all like medical reports from studies that were happening.
Not seeing.
From about 2012, like, results. Well, I haven't seen it. Email them to me, and I did, and I never heard from him again. But it was the same centre where Ems was then assessed afterwards.
Right.
And they said they'd give me the same doctor, and I'm like, yeah, no thanks. And she was like, well, I'm like the practice manager. I feel I ought to ask why. So I explained to her why. So she looked into everything, and most assessors, even now, will use the, I'm going to say testing card for want of a better word, but you know what they match it with. On the old assessment card that was based on boys from the 60s.
Oh, right.
So even now, you are going to have a whole generation of girls that are being misdiagnosed or not getting diagnosis.
Yeah, very, very interesting.
It's still happening now.
We've got a long way to go, Laura.
I had to fight for my child to be assessed by someone who basically kept their training up to date and their medical knowledge up to date. I had to fight for that.
Wow. Well, I'm sure that you'll continue to keep up the good fight, you know, for the foreseeable, you know, and definitely become a pioneer within this, you know, with this condition, to help educate others, because we desperately need it, you know. And I thank you so much for coming on today and just sharing your story with us. And I really appreciate your time. And for anybody who's interested in, for anyone who's interested in continuing the conversation with you, you know, where's the best place for them to be able to do that?
Any questions, anything like that? Probably Facebook. Lottie Woodman, Lottie Woodman, as it sounds. I don't check my messenger every day, but I do check it throughout the week. But yeah, no, I'm more than happy for any questions or anything. If I've said something that doesn't make sense to anyone, or something that does make sense, yeah, just hit me up on Facebook. That's perfectly fine.
Brilliant. Thank you so much indeed. And for anyone who wants to continue the conversation with me, or, you know, interested in publishing books, which I know that Lottie has spoken about as well, and hopefully you'll write a book about this as well in your journey, that would be absolutely brilliant. Yeah, and anyone who wants to, you know, talk about books or this, or wants to get in contact with Lottie through us, can also touch base with us via the website, which is beautyandthebeastpublishing.net. Okay, so goodbye from all of us, and you know, we look forward to having further discussions in the future. Thank you. Thanks ever so much.
Cheers.